Maybe you have been waiting for a long time. A response, a change, a miracle. Maybe there are days when faith seems to wear thin, and you wonder if it is still worth believing. But here is the truth. Your prayer has not been ignored, and your waiting is not in vain. God works in the eternal and the perfect, and what seems like a delay to you is actually the exact timing for something much greater than you imagine. Waiting is never easy. When we face challenges, we want immediate answers. We want to see doors opening now. But life does not always follow our clock, and it is in this silent interval that doubt begins to arise. Did God hear me? Does He care? The wait may seem like an endless void, but what many do not realize is that behind the scenes, God is working. His timing does not follow our hurried logic, but He is never late. He has plans for each of us, and those plans are perfect. What if the answer you have been waiting for is closer than you think? What if this waiting period is actually a gift, a phase of transformation that will lead you to something even greater? Many times, we are so focused on the arrival that we fail to notice how we are being shaped in the process. God is never late, and everything He does has a purpose. The question is not just what He will do, but who you are becoming while you wait. Human patience is fragile. We live in a fast-paced world where everything needs to be immediate, and waiting becomes a burden. But God is never late. He has plans for each of us, and His timing does not follow humanity's rushed clock. Sometimes, waiting seems like an endless silence, but the reality is that God works in the eternal and perfect. His perspective is greater than our limited vision, and what seems like a delay may actually be preparation for something much greater. Imagine a giant puzzle. Each piece represents a moment in life, and only God sees the complete picture. While we try to force everything into place, He knows exactly when and where each piece should go. Often, what we so desperately desire is not yet ready to be given. If we receive something before its time, we might not be prepared to handle it. God not only grants blessings, He shapes us to receive them at the right moment. How many times does anxiety make us act hastily? We want quick answers, immediate solutions, but God does not work according to human logic. He acts in perfect timing, and learning to trust that is one of the greatest challenges of faith. Many doors that do not open now are not rejections but deliverances. What seems like a no may actually be just a not yet. When viewed from the right perspective, waiting ceases to be a frustration and becomes an opportunity for growth. Think of a fruit. If it is picked while still green, it has no flavor. If it is plucked too soon, it will not fulfill its purpose. The same applies to God's plans. He has a perfect time for everything in our lives, and trusting in that timing is essential. But this does not mean standing still. During the wait, He works in us, maturing us, strengthening our faith, and preparing us for what is ahead. Waiting may feel like a dark tunnel, but there is light at the end. Sometimes, God allows us to go through silent periods because He is teaching us something precious: total dependence on Him. Joseph waited years for his dreams to come true. Hannah wept in prayer before holding Samuel in her arms. Moses was prepared in the wilderness before becoming a leader. The Bible is filled with examples that show us that waiting is never in vain when it is in God's hands. The truth is that our impatience can distance us from God's plans. When we try to rush processes that He has not yet completed, we risk making wrong decisions. Saul, for example, did not know how to wait for Samuel and lost his position as king. How many have rushed into relationships, financial decisions, or life choices because they did not know how to wait? The danger of impatience lies precisely in the illusion that we can do better than God. His timing does not follow our understanding, but it is perfect. While you wait, trust, because what is being prepared for you is much greater than what you imagined. The secret is not to try to understand, but to learn to rest in the certainty that He knows what He is doing. And if there is still doubt, look back. How many things did you want in the past that you now realize were not the best for you? How many times did you think God was late, only to later understand that He was protecting you? God's timing is perfect. What is meant for you will come at the right time, in the right way, and no one will be able to stop it. Waiting is not a punishment but a process of construction. God is never late. He has plans for each of us, and the Bible is filled with stories that prove this. From the patriarchs to the prophets, we see men and women who had to trust in God's perfect timing, even when everything seemed lost. If God allowed these examples to be recorded, it is because there are precious lessons in them. When we understand these accounts, we realize that waiting is not a sign of abandonment but of purpose. If today you feel that God is silent, remember, a seed grows in the dark before breaking through the earth. God's silence is not absence, it is a process. He works in the eternal and perfect, and what He has promised, He will fulfill. But in the meantime, the choice is yours, to wear yourself out with anxiety or to rest in the confidence that He is in control. Maybe the answer you are waiting for is closer than you think. Instead of asking, "Why is it taking so long?" perhaps the question should be, "What does God want to teach me in this time?" Waiting is not a punishment, it is preparation. God's timing is perfect and He is never late. And when the answer comes, you will see that every minute of waiting was worth it. So choose to trust, because those who learn to wait on the Lord are always surprised in unimaginable ways. Trusting in God's timing is not just about accepting that He knows what He is doing, but about surrendering every part of life without reservation. God is never late. He has plans for each of us, and those plans are far greater than we can imagine. But to live out this reality, we must make a decision. Will we keep trying to control everything with our own hands, or will we rest in the certainty that God is in command? This choice changes everything. Waiting may be uncomfortable, but it is also where our faith is strengthened. The truth is that waiting is not wasted time. It is a time of preparation. Joseph did not go straight from dreaming to leadership. He endured slavery and prison before reaching the palace. Moses needed the wilderness before leading Israel. Hannah faced years of sorrow before holding Samuel in her arms. The waiting period can be a time of transformation and spiritual growth. What God is building in you during this time will be essential for the purpose He has prepared. But trusting in God's timing does not mean being passive. While we wait, we should seek intimacy with Him. Prayer is not an emergency button to press only when things go wrong, but a constant relationship. When we surrender our worries to God, we find true peace. Philippians 4 verses 6-7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." The problem is not in the delay but in our preparation. Imagine giving a car to someone who has never learned to drive. The gift that was supposed to be a blessing would become a danger. God shapes us so that we can receive His victories at the right time. He wants to bless us, but He also wants us to be ready to manage those blessings with wisdom. Many times, waiting reveals what truly rules our hearts. If we become anxious and impatient, perhaps we are more focused on the blessing than on the one who blesses. God desires that we trust Him, not just in what He can give us. Jesus said in Matthew 6 verse 33, "But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." When we put God first, everything else falls into place at the right time. Another liberating truth is that God does not waste anything. No tear, no prayer, no waiting period is in vain. Everything is being used for a greater purpose. If today it seems like nothing is happening, trust. A seed germinates in the dark before breaking through the soil. What God is doing may not be visible now, but at the right time, everything will be revealed. God's timing is perfect. If you are waiting, it is not because God has forgotten you. It is because He is preparing something far beyond what you asked for. Trust, because when everything falls into place, you will look back and understand that every moment of waiting was part of a much greater plan. Waiting on God's timing is a daily exercise. It can be difficult, but every moment has a purpose. God is never late. He has plans for each of us, and those plans go far beyond what we can imagine. If the answer has not arrived yet, it does not mean it will not come. It simply means that something is happening behind the scenes, something that will only be revealed at the right time. And that time is not determined by our clock, but by God's perfect timing. Look back and see how many times God has already worked in your life. How many situations seemed impossible, but in the end, everything made sense. If He was faithful before, why wouldn't He be now? The waiting period can be a time of transformation and spiritual growth. Every detail is being adjusted, every piece of the puzzle is falling into place, even if you cannot yet see the whole picture. Anxiety may try to convince you that you need to take matters into your own hands, that God is taking too long, or that maybe He has forgotten you. But that is not true. Joseph was sold into slavery and spent years in prison before seeing God's plan unfold. Hannah wept and prayed before holding Samuel in her arms. Abraham and Sarah tried to rush the promise and learned that impatience can bring consequences. The lesson is clear. Waiting can be difficult, but forcing something before its time can be even worse. If today you feel like God is silent, remember, a seed grows in the dark before breaking through the soil. God's silence is not absence, it is a process. He works in the eternal and perfect, and what He has promised, He will fulfill. In the meantime, the choice is yours, to be consumed by anxiety or to rest in the confidence that He is in control. Maybe the answer you are waiting for is closer than you think. Instead of asking, "Why is this taking so long?" perhaps the better question is, "What does God want to teach me in this season?" Waiting is not a punishment, it is preparation. God's timing is perfect and He is never late. And when the answer comes, you will see that every moment of waiting was worth it. So choose to trust. Because those who learn to wait on the Lord are always surprised in unimaginable ways. Trusting in God's timing does not mean we will always understand His ways. Sometimes, His plans take unexpected turns, and we struggle to see the purpose behind the delays. But one thing remains true. He is always working for our good, even when we do not understand. Romans 8 verse 28 reminds us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." Faith is often tested in the waiting. When doors remain closed, when prayers seem unanswered, and when time stretches longer than we had hoped, it is easy to question whether God is truly listening. But He is. He sees every tear, hears every prayer, and knows every longing of our hearts. What we see as silence is often preparation. God is aligning circumstances, strengthening our character, and positioning us for the blessing He has planned. Joseph endured years of hardship before stepping into his destiny. If he had been released from prison too soon, he may never have reached the position God had prepared for him. Esther waited for the right moment to speak, and because she trusted in God's timing, an entire nation was saved. David was anointed king long before he took the throne, facing years of trials and battles before stepping into his calling. Their stories remind us that delays are not denials. They are part of God's divine strategy. In our impatience, we often try to create our own solutions. Like Abraham and Sarah, who attempted to fulfill God's promise through their own efforts, we risk stepping outside of God's perfect will when we rush ahead. The consequences of impatience can be painful, leading to unnecessary struggles. But when we surrender to God's timing, we avoid heartache and experience His blessings in their fullness. Waiting also refines our trust in God. It teaches us to lean on Him instead of our own understanding. Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6 encourages us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." When we let go of our timelines and embrace His, we find peace in knowing that He is in control. If today you find yourself in a season of waiting, remember this: God has not forgotten you. He is not ignoring your prayers or delaying without reason. He is working in ways you cannot see, orchestrating details beyond your comprehension. The waiting may be difficult, but it is not wasted. Every moment is shaping you for what is to come. So, instead of focusing on how long the wait has been, shift your focus to what God is doing in you during this time. Is He strengthening your faith? Teaching you patience? Drawing you closer to Him? The waiting season is often where the deepest growth happens, preparing you for the blessings that lie ahead. When you finally step into the fulfillment of what you have been waiting for, you will look back and see that every moment of waiting had a purpose. You will realize that God's timing was never late, but always right on schedule. And in that moment, you will be grateful that you chose to trust rather than rush. The best is yet to come. Keep trusting, keep believing, and keep waiting with faith. Because in His perfect time, God will reveal what He has been preparing for you all along. Waiting on God requires a heart that is willing to surrender completely. It is not just about believing that He has a plan, but about truly letting go of control and trusting that His way is better. Many times, our greatest struggle is not the wait itself, but our desire to understand every step before it happens. Yet, faith is about walking even when we do not see the full path ahead. When we choose to trust in God's timing, we embrace peace in the midst of uncertainty. Anxiety tells us to rush, to take matters into our own hands, to force outcomes. But trust whispers, "Be still and know that He is God." Psalm 46 verse 10 reminds us that God is sovereign, that He is in control, and that we do not have to carry the burden of figuring everything out. The waiting season is also a time of spiritual warfare. Doubts creep in, fears arise, and the enemy tries to convince us that God has forgotten us. But the truth is that the battle is won in perseverance. When Jesus was in the wilderness, tempted by the enemy, He did not give in. He stood firm on God's word. Likewise, in our waiting, we must hold on to His promises, knowing that His word never fails. God is never inactive. While we wait, He moves. Behind the scenes, He aligns circumstances, prepares hearts, and orchestrates events in ways we cannot comprehend. Just because we do not see immediate results does not mean that nothing is happening. The greatest works of God often unfold in ways we do not expect, in timing we did not anticipate. Many times what we call a delay is actually God's protection. He sees what we do not see. He knows what we do not know. What we perceive as a no may simply be a not yet. And what we think is rejection may actually be redirection to something far better than we imagined. When we truly believe that God's plans are for our good, we learn to rest even in the unknown. One of the greatest challenges in waiting is resisting the temptation to compare our journey with others. We see people around us achieving goals, receiving blessings, and moving forward, and we wonder why our story seems to be moving slower. But comparison is the thief of peace. God's timing for each person is unique. What He is doing in your life cannot be measured by what He is doing in someone else's. Instead of asking, "Why is it taking so long?" we should ask, "How can I grow in this season?" The waiting period is not just about the destination, it is about transformation. God is not only preparing the blessing for you, but He is preparing you for the blessing. He refines your character, deepens your faith, and strengthens your reliance on Him. Every great testimony in the Bible involves a period of waiting. Noah waited for the floodwaters to recede. Abraham waited for the promised son. Joseph waited in prison before stepping into his destiny. Moses waited in the wilderness before leading Israel. David waited years after being anointed before becoming king. The pattern is clear. Waiting is part of God's process. And in every case, the wait was worth it. There is no wasted time with God. Every delay serves a purpose. Every waiting season is an opportunity to trust Him more. When we surrender our timeline to Him, we are free from the burden of trying to make things happen on our own. Instead of striving, we rest. Instead of worrying, we worship. Instead of doubting, we declare His faithfulness. And one day, when the promise is fulfilled, when the breakthrough comes, when we finally see what God has been working on all along, we will understand why the wait was necessary. We will look back and realize that His timing was not just good, it was perfect. Until that day comes, keep trusting, keep waiting, keep believing. Because in His perfect time, everything will fall into place exactly as He intended. Waiting on God is not about passivity, it is about active trust. It is about choosing faith over fear, hope over despair, and patience over control. Even when we do not see the full picture, we can trust that God is weaving every detail together for our good. His timing is not random, it is intentional, purposeful, and always in alignment with His perfect will. One of the most powerful things we can do in a season of waiting is worship. Worship shifts our focus from what we lack to who God is. It reminds us that He is sovereign, faithful, and always working on our behalf. The enemy wants to use waiting to create doubt, but worship silences fear. When we praise God in the waiting, we declare that our trust is in Him, not in circumstances. Gratitude is another key to navigating seasons of delay. Instead of focusing on what has not yet happened, we can choose to thank God for what He has already done. Gratitude changes our perspective. It reminds us of God's faithfulness in the past, giving us confidence that He will be faithful again. Every answered prayer, every moment of provision, and every past deliverance serve as proof that God is trustworthy. It is also important to remain obedient while we wait. Sometimes we assume that waiting means doing nothing, but God often calls us to take steps of faith even before we see the full outcome. Noah built the ark before the rain came. Abraham left his homeland without knowing where he was going. The Israelites marched around Jericho before the walls fell. Faith requires action. We must be willing to move in obedience, trusting that God will direct our steps in His perfect time. One of the hardest things about waiting is the uncertainty. We do not know when, how, or in what way God will move. But uncertainty is not a sign of God's absence. It is an invitation to trust Him more deeply.